European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced a plan that she hopes will mobilize 800 billion euros to rearm Europe. The plan, set out in a letter sent to EU leaders, will be discussed by the 27 EU members at an extraordinary summit dedicated to defense on Thursday.
We are in an era of rearmament, and Europe is ready to massively boost its defense spending, both to respond to the short-term urgency to act and to support Ukraine, but also to address the long-term need to take on more responsibility for our own European security.
Von der Leyen explained that some 150 billion euros could come from a new instrument for defense spending. She did not clarify during her statement how this money would be raised and did not take questions from journalists. But Brussels expects the bulk of the funds, some 650 billion euros, according to their calculations, to come from national budgets. Von der Leyen has therefore proposed relaxing fiscal rules to allow countries to increase their defense spending, albeit limited to an additional 1.5% of their GDP. The President also calls for using part of the EU budget for cohesion to invest in defense, mobilizing private capital and increasing the scope of the European Investment Bank.
European Council President Antonio Costa acknowledged diverging approaches to peace in Ukraine, but touted the need for the EU to contribute to strong security guarantees in a letter to Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. In the letter, Costa said that while all parties wanted to end Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine with a ceasefire, there was a disagreement on how this should be done. Costa refers to the peace through strength approach, in which Ukraine should negotiate for a ceasefire from a position of military power supported by its allies. His letter was in response to one sent by the Hungarian head of state, pushing for the EU to follow the US approach to peace negotiations and enter into direct discussions with Russia on a ceasefire. The correspondence between the two officials came in the run-up to discussions amongst EU leaders at a summit convened to discuss the bloc's contribution to defend Ukraine.
The European Commission has avoided criticizing Washington after the latest decision from the Trump administration to halt all military aid to Ukraine. The White House says the pause is meant to demonstrate whether Zelensky is committed to reaching peace through negotiations with Russia.
D'abord, en ce qui concerne les États-Unis, oui, les États-Unis sont un allié, comme je pense la présidente l'a encore souligné aujourd'hui.
Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, took on a more serious tone, urging not just the EU but all European NATO members to increase their defense capabilities as soon as possible.
Nie mamy dzisiaj żadnego powodu, aby sądzić, że są to tylko słowa. Zresztą meldunki, które napływają z granicy, z naszego hubu, wiesiące też potwierdzają zapowiedzi strony amerykańskiej. I to oczywiście stawia Europę, Ukrainę i oczywiście Polskę w sytuacji trudniejszej.
The Kremlin welcomed the U.S. decision, highlighting signs of a pivot towards Moscow set to heighten anxiety in Europe. On Thursday, EU leaders will meet for an emergency summit dedicated to Ukraine and defense.
Strike while the iron is hot. On Tuesday, the European Commission began consultations on the future of the steel industry with sector stakeholders, such as ArcelorMittal and ThyssenKrupp, 1 week before the implementation of US tariffs. Its goal, to boost the competitiveness and decarbonisation of the struggling sector.
We will look at lowering the energy prices and see if there are some additional actions to be taken there. The focus is also on creating markets for clean steel, so we will see how we can boost, through public procurement, but also to putting labels on green steel so the producers can really reap the benefits of their investments.
The challenge is significant. The European steel industry is struggling under the rise in energy costs and the Chinese overproduction that floods the market and drives prices down. Additionally, the US 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium, which will come into effect on March the 12th, could deal a blow to an already fragile sector.
Of course we are worried about it. It's not only about the almost 4 million tons of steel exports every year to the US, but it's also about the 27 million tons of steel imports into the US, which will somehow be deviated to open markets. And then, of course, Europe is the first destination, and then we will have another wave of devastating steel imports, destroying our industry, jobs, capacity, and value chains in Europe.
A pillar of European construction, the European steel industry has around 500 production sites in 22 member states. It contributes €80 billion to the EU's GDP and provides 2.5 million jobs. It is also the backbone of other critical EU economic sectors, such as the automotive, construction, energy and defence industries. The course is set. The European Commission is expected to present its action plan for steel on March the 19th.
Serbia's parliamentary session in Belgrade spiraled into chaos after opposition MPs threw smoke grenades and tear gas to protest against the ruling government. They were also showing their support for students who have been protesting for months against corruption. Before the incident, lawmakers from the ruling coalition had proposed to adopt a series of laws before they were set to confirm the resignation of the prime minister. The opposition opposed the agenda and claimed it did not make sense to adopt laws coming from a government whose prime minister had resigned.
The incident occurred at the moment when representatives of the government of Serbia were entering the assembly hall. MPs of the opposition threw smoke bombs and eggs at the government representatives, preventing the continuation of session because they claimed that this session is illegal because the prime minister resigned a month ago. The speaker of the parliament continued the session despite serious incidents. 3 deputies were injured. For 3 months, student protests have been taking place in Serbia after the fall of an overhead crane in Novi Sad when 15 people died. The opposition is looking for a transitional government that would prepare the country for free and democratic elections. Marko Subotić, Euronews, Belgrade.
Both Canada and Mexico said they will strike back against the 25% tariffs imposed by US President Donald Trump. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau regretted the fact that the US launched a trade war against Canada, who he says is their closest ally. He warned US citizens that inflation is set to rise dramatically. Trudeau also used the opportunity to shut down allegations that Canada is unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl, which Trump claimed to be a key reason for introducing the tariffs.
Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see.
Trump said on his social media platform Truth Social that Trudeau's retaliatory tariffs would be met with reciprocal tariffs of the same amount. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum also condemned Trump's decision and said Mexico would respond with its own measures, which she will announce on Sunday in a public event.
No hay motivo, razón, ni justificación que soporte esta decisión que afectará a nuestros pueblos y naciones. Lo hemos dicho de diferentes formas. Cooperación y coordinación, sí. Subordinación, intervencionismo, no. A México se le respeta.
Sheinbaum also rejected accusations made by the White House, claiming Mexican drug traffickers persist due to what they say is an intolerable relationship with the government of Mexico.
As if not eating until sunset wasn't enough, Palestinians in Gaza are now worried they won't eat at all. Just as the calendar marks the start of the month of Ramadan and the first phase of the ceasefire with Hamas comes to an end, Israel has decided to stop entry of all food aid and other goods into Gaza.
عملية تسكير المعابر حتزيد سوء فوق السوء اللي احنا موجودين فيه، يعني هو حالنا اصلا في وجود فتح المعابر مش حسن، فما بالك لو سكروا المعابر حيكون تزداد الامور سوءا فوق السوء. ما فيش حاجة يعني كويسة اصلا في البلد كله.
Israel's halt on goods and aid, including fuel, is aimed at pressuring Hamas into accepting its new proposal for extending the ceasefire. But now, with no agreement on the second phase in sight, concerns are growing from Palestinians that Israel's decision will exacerbate the already dire conditions after more than 15 months of war. Most of Gaza's over 2 million people depend on humanitarian aid. The move has been condemned by the international community, while Hamas has called it a, quote, war crime and blatant attack on truce negotiations.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu took the stand on Tuesday in his ongoing trial for alleged corruption. He will answer to charges of fraud, breach of trust, and accepting bribes in 3 separate cases. Among the charges, he is accused of promoting advantageous regulations for media moguls in exchange for favorable coverage of himself and his family. Netanyahu denies wrongdoing, saying the charges are a witch hunt orchestrated by a hostile media and a biased legal system out to topple his lengthy rule.